Thank you, Jim, for joining us, everyone. This is Jim Foster. So Jim Foster, he possesses a broad depth of experience that comes from over 25 years of service in the financial services industry. As a part of Prudential Annuities Advanced Planning and Solutions team, Jim works exclusively with financial professionals, CPAs, and attorneys to help them understand the complexities and opportunities of retirement planning, income distribution, and estate planning. In addition to being a frequently requested speaker at broker-dealer and other national conferences, Jim has authored articles for numerous industry publications and has developed continuing education curriculum as well as different marketing material. Before joining Prudential, Jim was part of the Hartford's Retirement and Wealth Consulting Group, working with external wholesalers to conduct value-added meetings and deliver comprehensive planning strategies. Jim's also worked extensively with business owners, executives, other high net worth clients, advising them on retirement planning, wealth planning, estate planning. He's also worked at Merrill Lynch and is a financial planner at Legg Mason. Jim earned a BA from Florida State University in economics. He's attained his CFP as well as his CLU certification, and he's a member of the Financial Planning Association. So, Jim, are you coming at us from Florida out there right now?
I am down in Florida. So,
well, we sure appreciate having you today. I'll go ahead and turn the show over to you.
So, as Josh mentioned, I'm Jim Foster. I'm Director of Advanced Planning Solutions and Case Design for Pru. That's a mouthful, but my role with the firm, as Josh mentioned, is I travel around the United States in normal years. I travel around the United States about 46, 47 weeks a year doing presentations to primarily financial planners out in the field, top financial planning firms like Aprium, and speak at conferences. And then I write a lot of the material for the firm around financial planning topics as well. And the presentation we're bringing you today is actually one of my favorite presentations that I do. And the reason why is what I have found over time is when it comes to investments, people tend to spend a lot of time on their overall investment plan and pay a lot of attention to it. And the same could be when it comes to their estate plan and passing assets down to, say, their children or a charity or something to that effect. What I have found, though, over time is what many clients maybe neglect or just don't think about is efficiently making sure that upon the first death, when I'm dealing with a couple, that how the overall impact of that death is going to affect the surviving spouse, and to make sure that you're putting that surviving spouse in a situation where there's not going to be some type of financially catastrophic event that can really have an effect on their overall lifestyle. So that's what we're going to talk about today is spousal protection strategies, number one. And you're going to find throughout the presentation, I'm going to continually frame things today in the context of risk. So we're going to talk about a lot of things that maybe you have heard about before, Social Security, for example, IRAs or retirement accounts, for example, Medicare, for example, taxes, but we're going to do it all in the framing of how that surviving spouse will be at risk. And the goal maybe would be to give you a conversation to talk to, whether it's Harmon or Rhonda or Ben or Landon or Chris or Josh, to have a conversation with them to say, hey, am I set up in the event of when one of us passes, that the other one is not going to really be in a bad situation. That's the goal today. And as Josh mentioned, we're going to take about 35 minutes or so to do it. So first, I just want to talk about the landscape and the numbers I've given you for kind of the GAO and Social Security's come out with this. You know, when you think about when I'm dealing with a couple and one passes away, and you might think, well, how much income on average does that surviving spouse need? And you know, many would think like, okay, well, we're going from 2, going down to 1, maybe it's half or a little bit more than half. On average, a widow is going to need about 80% of a couple's income to maintain the same standard of living. Problem that we see in the averages today is that half are going to have 62% or less. So what that means is many of those surviving spouses are going to be very susceptible to financial shock. And that's what you don't want in that type of situation, right? So our goal today is to get out ahead of this and begin having conversations with your planner at Aprium of, what we don't want to happen is that surviving spouse to bear the risk of the overall plan. What can we do today to avoid that? All right. So, as we go into it, I don't want to give this away. I want to kind of throw this out at you real quick. When I do this presentation for financial planners out there, and I've done it nationally, the question I always ask them is, how long does it take to shift a plan from planning as a couple to planning as a single person when, unfortunately, a client passes away? And even with planners, the number one answer I typically get is 9 months, a year, something like that. Sometimes 6 months, sometimes 2 years, but 9 months to a year is the number one answer I get. I'm going to argue it's a 3-year process. All right, it's a 3-year process, and you need to identify how much you're going to be at risk when it comes to that process. So that's what this slide does. Goal here is to just kind of look at when you become a surviving spouse, and again, unfortunately, your spouse passes away. What am I thinking about in year 1? What am I thinking about in year 2? What am I thinking about in year 3? And I'm going to focus on some things more than others. Year 1, by and large, is just really around settlement of the estate, right? So when it comes to probating the will, for example, typically needs to happen in the first 9 months. Okay, executing, if you did have a trust in, let's say, your trustee or the trustee, I want to execute the wishes of the trust as far as retitling assets or anything else. Again, typically within the first 9 months. I might need to elect, depending on when the death occurs and the age. What do I do with the retirement accounts? Do I just simply do spousal assumption on the retirement accounts, which is typically going to be your best bet, or do I want it to go to some type of inherited IRA where the rules are going to be different? For example, if somebody passes away at a younger age, inherited IRA for some people might make more sense than spousal assumption. All right. You need to make any type of life insurance claims, right, or of such effect. And for a lot of people, you will also need to make a Social Security decision. And I want to pause right here. In the event that someone passes away, a spouse passes away, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to go down to the Social Security Administration and say, my spouse passed away, what do I do? All right. Because the Social Security Administration, typically, not always, maybe you'll get a really good office, but a lot of the times they're going to say, sign here, sign here, sign here, and you'll get your survivorship payment. And as you're going to see when we cover Social Security, that may not be the best option for you. There are different options you have of whether or not you want to continue your benefit payment, whether or not you want to take the survivorship payment, or a combination of both, and when. All right, so we'll talk about that a little bit. Year 2, it's going to be about the tax return, okay? So we're going to talk about moving from a joint tax return, because you're still going to file a joint tax return in the year of death, to moving to a single tax return. Well, that does 2 major things. Number 1, you will, if you're taking a standard deduction, you're going to, which most retirees are, for example, you're going to lose and go from a joint standard deduction down to a single. Not only that, I like to warn people, if your income's between about $80,000 and $180,000, kind of that is the big spot. A siren should be going off in your head that your taxes, when you move to that single return, are probably going up 100 to 150%. Okay. What I find is people make below about 60,000, they don't take a big tax hit. Those people making above 400,000 do not take a big tax hit. If you're making between 80 and 180 and that income stays the same, you're going to take a big tax hit. All right. So it's something we got to plan for, and I'll talk about a little bit about that. And then in year 3, you got to remember, if you know much about Medicare is always priced 2 years in the rears. Okay. So when Medicare does pricing, they're looking at what you made 2 years ago, and it like a tax return is priced based upon single or price based upon married filing joint. And it's what's called tier pricing. Well, when I get into the year 3 and they look back, I'm moving in from joint pricing down to single pricing. And what that does is that can actually bump me several tiers, okay? And kind of the same thing between 80 and in this case, it's about 85, okay? 83 to be technical, 83 up to about 180,000. Same thing. You could see doubles or triples in your Medicare premiums. It's just not going to happen right when death occurs. It's going to happen 2 years after it. And we need to be looking at long-term care decisions, and I'll talk about that too. So again, 3-year process, all right? Year 1, settlement of the estate, Social Security. Year 2, I'm looking at the tax return. Year 3, just understand that you can be highly impacted by increased Medicare premiums. All right, so surviving spouse needs to prepare for change. So I want to kind of, again, ask you to think of things in the context of risk, all right? And before we even get into what's on the screen here, I want you to think about your income streams, okay? So, all right, let's think about our income streams in retirement. Well, you know, everybody or most people have Social Security, so that's one income stream. And some people out there are going to have a pension, so that's another income stream. And then the rest of it's usually coming from our own assets, okay? And some of that, you know, you could have rental property, or you could have just a non-qualified account with bonds or dividend stocks in it, and then you could have your IRA. And I'm going to focus on the IRA, right? Because that typically is the asset that people get retirement income from. So let's say you had 3 sources of income: Social Security, pension, retirement. All right. Now let's think about, let's just say I have a husband and wife in this circumstance, and he's a couple years older, and we'll say it's a situation where they were married for a long time, and he went out and was the primary breadwinner, worked, and you know, maybe she worked some, but she also took some years off to stay home, take care of the kids, raise the family, then went back to work. All right, so let's kind of look just in general from a 30,000 viewpoint at that, which is a very common situation. All right, Social Security. Well, his Social Security benefit payment is larger, and you know, she may be on a spousal payment. All right, so is the Social Security payment at risk when the first party passes away? And the answer is yes. All right, we'll get into Social Security, but what happens in that circumstance is the low check goes, the high check stays. So I know I'm losing a check. If his check, for example, was $2,000 a month and hers was $1,000 a month, in that particular circumstance, I know I'm losing $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year in income. All right, let's keep going. Let's say he also worked at a company that provided a pension. And you know, when he elected that pension, or they elected that pension, they have different options. They can say, look, when I die, I'm going to take a lower payment today, but my spouse gets to maintain that whole payment. Or when I die, I get a little bit higher payment today, but she, in this case, is going to get a 25% reduction, or a 33% reduction, or a 50% reduction. Or I could take, I want the biggest check of all, and when I die, the payment dies with me. All right, so that's a single life payment only. So depending on what you elected, all right, is that payment going to be at risk? And the answer is obviously less. I could get into a situation where I picked a 50% survivorship payment or a 66% survivorship payment. And once again, I can define exactly what I'm going to be reduced. Let's say, for example, the pension was 3 and I picked a 66% survivorship payment, means when I pass away, my spouse is going to get 2. It's going to be reduced by $1,000. All right. So let's talk about, let's keep going and go into the IRA. Okay. When it comes to the IRA, remember, we're saving up, then we're taking required minimum distribution. So if he were, for example, die in the late 70s, 80s, I might be eroding that account down through required minimum distributions. If, say, I got simultaneously into a down market, the account value could be going down. She may be a few years younger. When I go to, for example, begin to take distributions based on her life expectancy, again, they could go down. So let's say I was taking maybe $4,000 a month out of the IRA. Now I'm going to have to cut that down to $3,000 a month. Okay. If you kind of add all that up, Social Security was 3, pension was 3, IRA was 4. They were getting $10,000 a month before the spouse passes away. Once the spouse passes away, I'm going from down to 2,000 in Social Security. I'm going down to 2,000 on the pension, and I'm going to 3,000 on the IRA. I'm going to 7. All right. So I've now gone from 10 to 7. Again, we need 80%. Okay, that should be a minimum of the goal. I'm already, the goal actually should be 100. Okay, 100%. But we're below where we need to be, and I'm telling you, it's a very common situation. And consequently, what happens is the surviving spouse winds up bearing a disproportionate amount of risk, and that's what this presentation is going to be all about. Is the surviving spouse, unfortunately, in almost any retirement plan, is the one who is really bearing the overall risk of the retirement plan. And when you think about that in large numbers or large context, what that tells me is not all the time, but more often than not, surviving spouse, or particularly females, wind up bearing a disproportionate amount of risk on the overall retirement plan. All right. So that was just on the income. And we talked about, even though we are going from 100 to 70 in income in this circumstance, you actually may pay more in taxes. Okay. There could be situations where the income goes down and you pay more in Medicare premiums. Okay. You could be in a situation where if you need to make up that income delta or that reduction in income, you wind up having to take more out of the IRA, and you increase the withdrawal rate to a point where it becomes unsafe, it becomes untenable, unmanageable. All right. Maybe I was only taking out 4% as long as we were both alive, but when that Social Security payment got cut and when that pension payment got cut, I had to take out more, and maybe it went up to 5 or 6%, which over long periods of time puts the overall account at risk as far as running out of money. So what you're going to find here is longevity magnifies these risks, right? And that takes me into my next slide. So longevity really, once again, winds up really bringing a disproportional amount of risk to women. If I look at say a 65-year-old couple, what you see on the left-hand side there is essentially 50% of men are going to live to be 87, 90% of women, 50% of women will live to be at age 90. If I look at in totality of that couple, at least one member of that couple is expected to live to be 94, 50% of the time. All right. Now, I think we all know people are living longer. That's not what I want to focus on. What I want to again focus on is what is on the right-hand side, which is when you live into your 80s, when you live into your 90s, what's happening is you are facing a risk multiplier. All right, so let's think about the different risks you might have in your retirement. The first one, obviously, that you deal with your planners at Aprium is your investments, and you can do a great job mitigating market risk, but you can't get rid of it typically, right? If you were in the market between the 3rd week of February and the 4th week of March of last year, you probably did not do so well. So the longer I live, which the surviving spouse obviously lives longer, they will face greater probabilities of bear markets. If I were to have a client who's a 65-year-old couple and he dies at, let's say, 70, he only lives 5 years, but she lives to be 95 years old. Well, he might only see one bear market. He might not see any, okay? If I live 30 years into retirement, you're going to see probably 3 or 4 bear markets, okay, on average. So the surviving spouse winds up bearing a disproportionate amount of market risk. Healthcare costs, especially when it comes to rising healthcare costs. Right now, you hear a lot about inflation. Again, when it comes to healthcare, if I retire at 65 and I pass away at 70, was I likely spending a lot of my overall assets on healthcare? No. I mean, some people would because they might be very sick, but a lot of people might be healthy until maybe the last 6, 9 months, year, or what have you, and then unfortunately things go south and they pass away. But they don't really notice a lot of health issues. As you get into your 80s or 90s, I think most people would agree, I don't know too many people who get a lot healthier as they get into their 80s and 90s. So they wind up, again, bearing a disproportionate amount of healthcare risk. Think about inflation. I just mentioned it with healthcare. If I, again, retire at 65, I die at 70, am I really going to notice inflation? Well, typically I would say no. This year's the exception because I can notice it every week when I go to the grocery store. But typically it's not going to have a big impact on me, right? My purchasing power is not eroded within, say, a 5-year life expectancy or lifespan that I have between 65 and 70 if I pass away early. My spouse lives to be 90, 95 years old. Is she going to notice inflation? Yeah, her purchasing power likely is going to get maybe even eroded in half. At a 3% inflation rate, it gets eroded in half at about 24 years, okay? So that's something that I would want to look at. I'm also more susceptible to interest rate fluctuations over the time. So again, you have this risk multiplier effect that really impacts people who are the surviving spouse and overall couple, just because they're alive longer to face those particular risks. All right, so things that we need to be thinking about here is, let's think about, for example, some of the things we talked about here, pensions or survivorship benefit options. When you go to make that survivorship benefit option in a pension, just understand, okay, anything below really 80%, you're putting the client into a situation, in my opinion, you're putting yourself into a situation where you're going to need to create other income streams to make up that loss of pension income. So while, for example, I might get a lower payment today, picking 100% survivorship payment, or 80 if they offer it, or even at least 75. You get down below 75, just understand I need to have some other type of asset to make up that pension loss of pension income for that surviving spouse. Safe and sustainable withdrawal rates, not only for one, but for 2 lives. This is going to be very important when you are talking about a couple where I have disparity of assets within an IRA. So in other words, I have one big IRA, maybe one small IRA. I want to make sure that that big IRA is going to be there for both lives, okay? Because likelihood is both people are going to count on it for income. You may need additional sources of guaranteed income. Not going to get in that today. We'll leave that to your planners at Aprium of whether or not that's appropriate for you. And that can be done in a variety of ways. Could be done through bonds, could be done through annuities, could be done through whatever that they deem fit. And if all else fails, if you can't do those things we just talked about, one additional way to do things is just to reliquify your estate with a life insurance policy. All right, if I can't create those other income streams and I am spending down the income sources, then when one party passes away, I do need some type of reliquification of the estate, i.e. a life insurance payment to come in that I can then rely on to generate the payment to generate income in the future. That obviously is another alternative for you. All right, let's get into Social Security. I'm not going to get into a real deep Social Security presentation with you here. I just want to talk about some mistakes that I see people make and make sure we understand survivorship benefits, what the options are for you. So when you elect Social Security, the government starts everything with your benefit of what's called FRA, or full retirement age. Full retirement age today, depending on your age, will be anywhere from 66 to 67 years old. I'm not going to get into exactly when, but if you're on the call today, it's somewhere between 66 and 67 years old. A lot of people will be 66. A lot of people will be 67. For some of you, it might be in between, like 66 and 4 months or 6 months or 8 months. Then, if you decide to take the benefit early, the government runs a calculation to reduce the benefit payment, all right? And you can take it as early as age 62, but every month you take it early, they're going to reduce it a little bit, all right? As a matter of fact, if you take it day one, if you're a primary, you'll get reduced as much as 25 to 30%. Could be as much as 30%. All right. If you delay beyond your full retirement age, the opposite is true. They actually will increase your benefit payment beyond the full retirement age. And it's pretty easy on the way up. They actually, not a real complex calculation, they do an 8% simple interest increase in the benefit payment every year beyond your full retirement age. So if you were 66, for example, 8, 16, 24, 32%. So my payment, if I delay beyond full retirement age, will be, depending on my retirement age, full retirement age will be between 24 and 32% higher. Now, here's why this matters. And I talked to you a little bit about it earlier. What happens in a spousal situation when somebody passes away? Low check goes, high check stays. So if I'm one of the people, and I'll show you here on the blue area of this slide, 71% of men are taking reduced benefits, 75% of women are taking reduced benefits. And let's say this is me and my spouse, and I decide to take it early. And let's say my benefit at 62 was $1,500 a month. And if I waited till 66, it would be $2,000 a month. And if I waited till 70, it would be $2,640 a month. All right. Well, if I took it at 62, day one, 1,500, and let's say I'm the high payment, I go for 5, 10 years and then I die. What is my spouse going to get? Well, she's going to get my payment. It's $1,500 a month because the low check drops off, the high check stays. I'm again assuming I'm the high check here. Now, how long is she going to get that? Well, she's going to get it the rest of her life. If she's 70 or 75 years old, that could be 20 or 25 years. I have locked her in to a low benefit payment, which could be for 20 to 25 years of time. Had I waited, what would she be getting? Well, if I waited until full retirement age, in my scenario, she wouldn't be getting $1,500, she'd be getting $2,000 a month. Had I waited till I was 70, what would she be getting? Well, she'd be getting $2,640. Now, again, she might be getting this benefit payment for 20, 25 years. Run $1,140 a month times 12 months times 25 years and see what number you get, all right? So what I tell people is one of the biggest single mistakes I see in Social Security is when I see disparity of age, maybe 4 to 5 years in the marriage, and the higher income person is the older person. And then I see disparity of income benefit under Social Security. In other words, we didn't both work, we didn't both have a kind of an equal paying job, then I don't have to worry about it. But if I have somewhere where I was older, I went out, I worked, I made the money, I have a spouse who stayed at home, raised the kids, she didn't have such a high benefit payment, I'm telling you that situation, 99% of the time you want to wait. It has nothing to do with the lifetime expectancy of me taking the benefit now. It has everything to do that it becomes a dual life expectancy benefit, and she may be on that benefit for 20, 25 years after I pass away. All right. So that's something to take a look at. And you're going to see on the next slide, survivorship benefits can get a little complex. Full retirement, primary benefits and spousal benefits, they're pretty plain vanilla, cut and dry anymore. There used to be a lot of strategy to them, but there's not anymore. Survivor is still the one benefit that there is a lot of strategy with. So, and the reason why is, number one thing you have to understand is we already talked about, low check goes, high check stays. Number two, survivorship benefits can begin as early as age 60. You don't have to wait 62 on that, all right? Now, like any benefit, if you take it early, they will reduce it, all right? It can be reduced essentially by 28%. So just understand, I can take it at 60, it will be reduced. But the kind of bottom shaded box there is what's most important, which it is the only benefit that can be switched between the survivor benefit and your own benefit. In other words, I can take a survivor benefit and then I can switch to my own at some point, or I can take my own and then switch to a survivor at one point, all right? And it's something you really should be considering of what's going to be the best situation for you. Now, if I have a situation where a spouse passes away before your full retirement age, the first question you'll always ask yourself is, am I working, okay? Do I have earned income? And if the answer to that is yes, and it's earned income of any significance, above basically $18,000, you're probably not going to want to elect the benefit payment. The reason why is you're just going to fail what's called earnings test on it. All right. In other words, the government's just going to claw back the benefit. They're going to give it to you and then tell you, give me it back. You make too much money. But if you're not working, a very standard strategy is going to be, in that situation, take the survivorship payment at age 60, allow your own retirement credits to continue to accrue all the way to the maximum, which happens to be age 70, and then switch to your own at age 70 once you've got the maximum amount of delayed retirement credits. Alternatively, another situation could be, for other people could be, you take the low benefit payment for yourself at age 62, and then you wind up switching to the higher survivorship payment once you hit full retirement age, say at age 67. And it becomes a big math problem. So here's what I tell you, why I say earlier is, don't make that decision yourself. You have experts in Chris, right, and Harmon and Rhonda and Ben and Landon and Josh. You have experts at all these who, number one, have the capability and the experience in making that decision, but also have the software capabilities to run the math for you. All right. So it's something that you should be taking a look at in the event of your spouse passing away. Go see your planner. Go see your planner before you ever walk into the Social Security office. And then again, when it comes to Social Security, in certain circumstances, consider delaying those benefits, if not necessarily for the higher benefit payment for yourself, but having a higher survivorship payment for your spouse. In the event that we know that a check is going to drop off because that low check goes, maybe have a supplemental income source in place where I know I have this other asset that's sitting over there and I'm not going to use it today and I'm going to let it grow. And then when my spouse passes away and that Social Security check drops or that pension check drops, I'm going to turn that on and that's going to make up the difference. And again, life insurance always would be an idea if you need to just bring other assets into the estate, like reliquify the estate. All right, healthcare. This is the one a lot of people don't think of and never consider, okay? So when you look at healthcare pricing, okay, for those on Medicare are probably pretty familiar with this. It's done through tiers, number one, and it is done based upon your income, what's called modified adjusted gross income from 2 years ago, okay? They're always looking 2 years in the rears, all right? So when you look at that, all right, it's determined based upon if you are married or filing joint on your return, right? So they're going to look at this thing and they're going to say, okay, I'm married and I make, let's say, $180,000. Actually, I want to kind of highlight this: $170,000 a year. Well, my premium payment's going to be $148. Okay. Now, my spouse passes away, and let's say your planners at Aprium did a really good job, and your income does not go down at all. All right, it stays at 170. Well, in the year of death, you're still going to be paying that 148. Next year, you're going to be paying the 148 because you're looking back. All right, 2 years, you're going to pay the 148 because you're still looking back 2 years. However, in the third year, they're going to look back and they're going to see a single return. Okay, and you're still at $170,000 in income. You are going to shift to the tiered pricing from a joint to single. All right, and to give you an idea, okay, you look at it, tiered pricing, there's 6 tiers. You were in tier 1, which is the lowest tier, your payment was $148 a month. At 170, when I go single, okay, you're going from not tier 1, not tier 2, not tier 3, not tier 4, you're going to tier 5. The payment in tier 5 on your Medicare would be $475 a month. Your premium in that particular circumstance would go from 146 to 475. Now, I cherry picked the number, okay? But let's take maybe a little more common number, 120 grand in income, and it doesn't move. All right, you're still going from 148 to 297. You're still doubling, okay? So you look at it, it would be a situation where, just understand, between about 80 and 180, that's the sweet spot. You're going to get beat up when it comes to Medicare. Now, I do want to talk about just healthcare cost in general. Okay, so Fidelity has been a leader in this. They do a big benefits study and consulting study on healthcare every year. And the question they always ask is, on average, what over a life expectancy will a couple pay out of pocket on Medicare? Because a lot of people think Medicare is free. It's not. And their number for this year, actually, it's updated here. 2019 was 285. 2020, when they did the study, it was 295. So what they're saying is, on average, you can count on a couple will spend on average over the life expectancy just on what a Medicare doesn't cover, $295,000. That's deductibles, the co-pays, everything. All right, drugs, everything. That does not include long-term care. Okay, and I do want to take a minute and just kind of talk about long-term care. All right, and I'm not going to get into long-term care insurance and that kind of stuff. I just want to talk real quick about I think you should at least have a plan when it comes to long-term care. So I want to give you some data, okay? And we're going to start by talking about, well, what's your probability of going into a long-term care facility? And it's basically about 50%, okay? Now, it's highly dependent on if you are male or female. A male is about 40% probability, a female is about a 60% probability, okay? So once again, females bear a disproportionate amount of risk. All right, if you go in, how long are you going to be there? Average male is in there 2 years. Worse news again for females. Average females in there for 4 years. So as a guy, you have a lower degree of probability going in. When you go in, you're not going to be there as long. All right. Females, higher degree of probability going in. You go in, you're going to be there twice as long. What is the cost? Again, I can give you the national averages. Home care, which is home unskilled, right? Somebody just coming helping you out at home is about 50 grand a year. Skilled nursing is about 100, okay? That though is highly dependent on where you live. If you live in LA County, it's a lot different than if you live in, Columbia, South Carolina, okay? So you got to look at kind of your own area. And what I tell people is this, just have a hedging plan in place. What you don't want to do, and what I see time after time after time, is you get in a situation where somebody goes into long-term care for 3 or 4 years, you're dealing with the bills at home, and then you also have to pay the long-term care cost. And then what happens is you start eroding out the overall assets of the plan, and the surviving spouse doesn't have enough to live off of when the spouse that's in long-term care finally passes away. So even just to play the average and say the average person might be in there, let's take the middle between 2 and 4. And that's 3 years. And I know it's on average about $100,000 a year. I'm going to grab $300,000 of coverage. That's going to keep the plan going for at least a couple of years. Now, people will push back and say, well, what if I'm in there for 15 years? And my point with that is, for most people, look, that's going to break you anyway, okay? There's not a big difference between, a little broke and a lot broke, and that is going to break most people. So what's not, though, is playing the averages and just making sure the plan can continue and be in place for that surviving spouse. But a lot of things to consider, how to hedge that long-term care, whether it's an insurance policy or a life insurance policy or self-insuring or having an additional income stream. Can I impact my overall Medicare costs by creating a plan that's going to keep modified adjusted gross income low? That's all about the overall plan. Having additional sources of income, like we mentioned about, maybe developing money in an HSA to leave to the spouse to help offset higher premium payments. A lot of people don't know you can actually reimburse yourself your Part B and your Part D Medicare premiums out of an HSA. So if I have an HSA account and those premiums do go up, I can help offset that, as well as other types of copays and that out of the HSA. And again, one way around all of this is to make sure, if appropriate, I have a life insurance policy bringing back money into the estate, which some will have long-term care riders in it. So, I'm going to spend just about 2 more minutes. I'm going to bring Josh back in. Look, this is all about having a plan. And, a lot of times when we're talking to our financial planners, the dominant conversation is around the investments. And I get it, right? That's the dollars we have today. But beyond that, having a plan is going to be extremely important. Not only a retirement plan that, you know, it lasts as long as I do, and an estate plan that gets the money down to the kids, but I'm going to argue one of the most important things, much more important than giving money to the kids, is making sure the surviving spouse is in a situation where they do not have to adjust their lifestyle. I mean, I'll tell you frankly, I don't care if the kids get anything, okay? What I do first and foremost care about is that the surviving spouse is not into a situation where they're financially eroded because of what happened with the income streams, the disproportionate amount of risk that they weigh, and making sure that I have a situation where if I do go into long-term care, that's taken care of as well. So, look, summary on this is, hey, at some point, you know, when somebody does pass away, retirement income is increasing, the liabilities can be increasing, and we want to make sure we have a secure retirement for widow and widowers that are particularly vulnerable for outliving your retirement assets and your retirement income.
Some of the previous educational series that we've done so far, we did one on portfolio construction series. You know, how do we put together a great asset allocation? How do we pick, you know, both the individual stocks, the ETFs, the bonds that are added into your portfolio, what happens over the long run? You know, that's the investment piece, right? We talked about financial planning, the importance of financial planning, and planning for the long term as well through our wealth building series. Then we got together and we brought somebody in from the Social Security Administration, had them come in, talk deep about Social Security benefits themselves. We did Medicare, we did long-term care, and I really liked Jim's presentation today because I thought it did a fantastic job of taking all that education that we've talked about over the past year and a half or so now, and highlighting this kind of piece of the puzzle that's out there, which is, okay, we have all of these different things that are happening, but there really is this this potential risk that happens, you know, in the case that one spouse passes and who's left over, and that surviving spouse really is you know, having to carry that risk on, right? And how do we deal with that? And I think one of the big things that I want to say to, you know, just let everybody that's on the call know is that you don't have to have all of the answers. We are here to help you. You know, Jim mentioned things like Social Security and having the software to go through and look at the math and what kind of scenarios look right. So if anybody is on the call today that has not taken us up on our financial planning yet, I mean, that is part of being a client. It doesn't cost you anything extra. We want to be doing the financial planning. We feel that it helps us do a better job of supporting you and being a fiduciary for you in the long run. One of the questions that we have here for you, Jim, is could you go over the spousal benefit options in an IRA, 10-year assumption account, etc.?
Yeah, anymore with the Secure Act, there's basically two that you're going to look at, okay? And I'm going to argue, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, you guys deal with clients more than me. I'm going to argue 95% are probably taking option one. At least 90 are probably taking option one.
Sure.
And option one is spousal assumption, okay? Which means if I'm married and I pass away or my spouse passes away, we both, let's just say, have IRAs, I can essentially take that IRA and roll it into my own and treat it as if it is my own IRA, okay? So I have that option, all right? And again, you know, especially once you get into a situation where maybe people are older, that's 99% of the time what they're going to do, okay? Now, there are certain situations where my other option is going to come into play, which is essentially treat it as a beneficiary IRA. Okay, so my other options, I can treat it as a beneficiary IRA. With beneficiary IRAs, okay, I now have essentially two options as a spouse. Okay, I can elect to take it anytime within a 10-year period. Okay, so I could not take anything for 9 years, and then I would have to liquidate the entire account within the 10th year. Or I could take 1/10 of it the first year, 1/9 of it the second year, 8th, 7th, 6th, and spread it out over 10 years. But because you are a spouse, I also can elect what's called a life expectancy distribution out of an inherited IRA. And what that means is I can get into a situation where I only take a payment based upon my own, essentially my own life expectancy, okay? Now, why would I do that? That is typically going to be in situations where somebody passes away under the age of 59 and a half, okay? And the reason why you do that is because if I were to take spousal assumption, if let's say I'm under 59 and a half, my spouse dies, and I take spousal assumption, and then I need money, okay, and I go in and I take a distribution on my IRA, what happens? Because I'm under 59 and a half. You got to pay a penalty, right? You got to pay a penalty. If I have the money in the beneficiary IRA, okay, then I don't have that issue, okay? I can go in and I can take withdrawals essentially as I want to, and I'm taxed on it, okay, but I am not going to wind up paying a penalty, all right? So I'm going to argue, and again, Josh, tell me if there's other circumstances I'm not thinking of, but I would argue most of the time that's what you're looking at is 95% of the time it's going to be spousal assumption. In the situation where a surviving spouse might need some income, then I'm probably going to go to inherited and basically say, all right, I'm going to have the option to take it when and if I want it, how I want it.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, and you mentioned the point earlier, but they need the income and they're pre 59 and a half. I think the pre 59 and a half piece is really the kind of where it all hinges on what's going to be the better option. Everyone's different. We've had scenarios. You're right. Most of the time it's just spousal assumption, but
you can split it. You can split it too.
But we've had plenty of scenarios where it's we're receiving funds, lump sum from a pension and receiving a 401k, and we took the 401k as a beneficiary or inherited IRA because we know we're going to tap into the funds, before reaching 59 and a half years old. We can circumvent that penalty tax. In the case of something like that comes up. So what about Jim? Same kind of scenario, right? But instead of it being in a retirement account, what if it was a taxable asset?
Okay. So when it comes to taxable assets, it's going to be, how are we titling? How are we, is it being held in trust, not in trust? I'm going to assume it's not in a situation, which is, I shouldn't assume this, but, anymore you get into second marriages and that kind of thing where, I may need some special planning to make sure the assets go into trust to be held eventually for the use of my spouse today and then my kids later on. But simple titling basically can get you around that, right? And a spouse essentially has a limited amount of assets that they can assume in that particular circumstance. In a marriage, there's no taxes involved, there's no estate taxes involved. Now, especially this year, this is going to be an interesting year. I'd say there's a reasonably good probability you're going to see some changes in the estate tax law this year. And if you don't this year, you are next, okay? So in the next, call it 18 months, out of the administration out of Washington, you're going to see changes in estate tax law. Most of the time, though, it's an easy transition where I file a death certificate and affidavit of domicile, and I can just move the assets from one to another. In a lot of circumstances, you're going to want to go ahead and file a state tax return to make sure that you take advantage of portability of estate credit. So once again, I'm going to come down to, in the case of a death, you run down to the planner and say, hey, what do I need to be doing to make sure that I'm maximizing, not having to get in a situation where eventually I'll be taxed or anything like that. But you have unlimited property that can pass between spouses, so even not going to be an issue there either.
Could you ask about when it would make sense to set up a trust?
Okay. I'm going to argue a trust is something that's going to a little work on the front end and a little expense, okay? I don't know in the California marketplace what it costs. In Florida, $3 to $4 grand will get you a pretty nice trust, as far as, pretty detailed, time with a lawyer to draw it up and everything. The main benefit of a trust is you're going to avoid probate court, okay? Probate court is an extremely expensive process. If you believe Trust Estates Magazine, they're going to tell you 67% of the value that goes through probate court, okay? Now, if you have assets that can be primarily passed via directed beneficiary, i.e. IRAs, titling, that kind of thing, and that's all you have, there might not be a great deal of a reason to do it. But inevitably, what I find is most everybody has some type of specialized situation that a trust is going to, again, for a few $1,000 be probably a good idea. It's just in a loan and avoiding probate court. Okay. I'll give you an example. I don't know if this is true anymore. I know, I know we have Southern California people on the line. In Northern California in 2019, the wait to get into probate court in San Francisco alone was 18 months. Okay, just to get on the docket in the court. So that alone would really drive me to want to put my assets into trust, from the sense that, I don't want my family to be dealing with this thing 2 years after I'm dead. Okay, so I like it. I think it's a small bill to pay, $3 to $4 grand, that can be saving tens of thousands of dollars after you're passed away. And another thing it does is it really clarifies things. It stops the fighting between the kids. Mom said in this, I want her to get this, I want him to get this. He doesn't get it for 5 years. She gets it today. Whatever it is, you can make your wishes very detailed and very known in a trust document. So I can't give you an answer of when to do it. I'm just going to tell you, in my opinion, it's a good idea to do on the balance. But spending a little bit of money, it's your money you're going to spend, but you're benefiting a lot of people on the back end and maybe heading off a lot of problems. Let me put it like that. And talk to your planners, okay, at Aprium. They're going to know your situation better and tell you if it's a good idea or not. That's just kind of a general opinion from me.
Yeah, we also have some great estate planning attorneys we work with that we really know and like and trust, that we can put you in touch with, or bring in for a joint meeting where we sit with you. We talk through all those details together. Okay, I think we have enough time for one more question here that came in, and it says, this is a good question, and I think it is very situational. All right, should we wait for the first spouse to pass before creating an annuity for essential costs for the survivor?
All right, so it's in general, I can't give you advice on your own situation, but I will tell you this. In general, if you are going to create that annuity, okay, creating it early requires less dollars. So an annuity is going to have a feature typically, okay, that allows it to grow while it's just kind of sitting there. That income continues to grow. So every year you don't take income, they raise the income. Then you don't take income that year, they raise the income. So by doing it early, it allows you to use less capital to create that income source. Now, the only problem with it we have is we don't know when the first spouse is going to pass away. So we're making some projections, like I'm in my late 60s today. We're going to make an assumption the first death is at 80 years old or 82 years old or something like that. If the death happens at 75, then that annuity might be underfunded. If the death happens at 93, all right, that annuity is overfunded. So I don't necessarily think you have to wait. I think, again, I can use less capital, but it's an imperfect maybe plan, right, when I do that. So, and again, it also depends on your own situation. If your retirement's so overfunded that it's not going to matter, I might look at something else. If it's underfunded, then I might look at turning on a lifetime income stream even earlier, right? So that's a conversation to have individually.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit of color to that, I think that again, it is very situational, and the answer can be very, very different depending. And just to give an example, if you have two spouses that are the same age versus one spouse that's substantially older than another spouse, the joint lifetime income that you're locking yourself in on that joint life, when there's a big gap in the age, 10 years plus from the age of one spouse to the next, the amount of income you're locking in can be substantially lower, right? And so if the idea is we want to make sure that we're planning, just think, well, both of us are alive, our spending is okay, but I'm worried about spending habits after I pass. Again, something like the trust can come in and can solve that problem as well, and it can actually designate that once I pass, I want to make sure these assets go into an annuity so that it's a structured payout, you know, to make sure that that lasts for as long as my spouse does. And now after I've passed and we go into that annuity, it's based on one life, so the income can be higher for her because she was substantially younger than I was. So those factors can be different. These are very technical, and it's not a straight answer for everyone. It can be very difficult to give a one-size-fits-all broad stroke. I think Jim did a great job of giving a good broad answer to something that can be very, very specific. Okay, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and tie it up here. We got 1 minute left. Jim, thank you again. It was a pleasure having you. All of our guests, attendees, thank you guys for coming. You know, I know a little bit late in the day on a Wednesday, so we sure appreciate you guys doing it after market close. That's when we like to schedule it. So thank you again. And if you have any questions, please reach out, see your advisor, fill out the survey. If you'd like to request a review meeting, there's a section in there where you can check a box and one of us will reach out and schedule an appointment for you.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.